Now that the Super Bowl is in the rearview mirror, what's next for the Chiefs and the Eagles? Hey everyone, welcome into NFL This Week. Rob Wong joined alongside by Paul Chapman. And Paul, what a Super Bowl it was if you were a Philadelphia Eagles fan, not so much if you are a Chiefs fan. I think a lot of people, though, were maybe rooting to see that outcome. It's something we haven't seen for quite a long time from the Chiefs on this stage. But we now shift into the offseason and we start looking ahead to the futures for both of these teams. We'll get to the one on the winning side in a moment, but you look at this Chiefs team, I think the faces kind of said it all. They've never really been in this position where they've looked so bad on the big stage, but you still got Patrick Mahomes, which is clearly the big key, but you got a guy in Travis Kelce. His future is up in the air. They're still a great team, no doubt, heading into next year, but what do you think the outlook is for them moving forward?
Well, it's going to be tough. There's been a lot of conversation about how the Eagles and the Chiefs also handle the salary cap in terms of pushing money forward. And they're now reaching that spot where Kelce is older and was pretty much a non-factor in that game. They have issues on the offensive line, and the Eagles won. All due respect to the offense, the Eagles won on defense. And the fact that they were able to get such intense pressure with just four guys without blitzing, drop other guys into coverage, and Mahomes looked flustered. And we've seen this before. That's how they lost their Super Bowl to the Buccaneers, who generated all this pressure but had many guys back in coverage, and Mahomes had nowhere to go. So the Chiefs fixed it. Now they have to fix it again. They had left tackles problems all year, and that really came back to bite them in the Super Bowl. Trey Smith expected to be one of the top 2 or 3 free agents at guard, so that's another piece they're going to have to replace, and they don't have a lot of money to do it. So their GM, Brett Veach, has said that they really won't have a free agency this year. It's all about the draft. And of course, they're drafting at the end of the round, and this does have some attrition. You get to the Super Bowl every year, you don't have a top draft pick. So it's going to be a fascinating story because I would never write off Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, but they don't have a lot of resources, because even if you looked at trade, who do they trade aside from an aging Chris Jones with a big contract? And you're not going to trade Patrick Mahomes. So what other pieces do they have? So it's a fascinating offseason for the Chiefs, but they've done well plugging rookies into these spots before. But they're answering some tough questions, and they're paying some bills that got them 2 Super Bowls, or 3 Super Bowls, but 2 in a row. They definitely have to answer those bills now in terms of where they've pushed the salary cap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a fascinating offseason in a lot of different ways for the Chiefs. So moving on to the team that is now the reigning Super Bowl champion in the Philadelphia Eagles. They've now been there 2 in the last 3 Super Bowls. They've only won the one, of course. But, you look at the franchise and they're in a great spot with Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley coming off a fantastic season. They do lose Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, but they would seem to be still in a good spot here moving forward. You don't want to throw the D word around. The dynasty gets thrown around a lot these days in the National Football League and a lot of sports, of course, but the Washington Commanders coming off a great year. They look to be a formidable team down the next few years in the NFC East. But how do you think the Eagles, now coming off the Super Bowl, kind of stack up with the rest of the league moving forward?
Look, it's a great story, and you have to admire Howie Roseman, and if I was to put my money on any GM who could figure this out, it would be him. But the Eagles have some major questions. Their offensive line, which is fabulous, best in the NFL, it is getting a bit older. So I'm not quite sure that that's going to be a huge issue for them this year, but it will be soon. They replaced Jason Kelce pretty easily, but Mekhi Becton they signed him on a 1-year deal, and his stock has gone through the roof. Can they afford to bring him back? On the defensive side of the ball, they're probably losing Brandon Graham to retirement. And then again, Howie Roseman made these deals, 1-year deals for Zach Bond. He had a spectacular year. I'm not sure they can afford to bring him back. Josh Sweat, the edge rusher, had a magnificent Super Bowl. Many people might have even said he should have been the MVP over Hurts. Darius Slay, 34 years old. He's got a cap hit around $14 million. Will he be back? So the Eagles have a lot of holes to fill as well. I'm sure they don't care because, they're preparing for a Super Bowl championship parade. But it's not cut and dry that this team's going to come back. Now, they've got a ton of talent. They still have Saquon Barkley. They still have an amazing offensive line. Jalen Hurts still in his, I'm not quite sure he's even entered his prime yet. And they've got 2 fabulous receivers and a great tight end. So their offense is going to be good. It's going to be solid. They have to find the coordinator. They did this before 2 years ago. They lost both their coordinators and then went through some transition, but found until they found more. It is late in the hiring process, though. That's the thing that's a bit, you're not going to get an OC make a lateral move. So you got to find a position coach or a retread to come in there and work with Nick Sirianni there. So I love the Eagles story. I think it's great. I love what Howie Roseman does in terms of his wheeling and dealing. But same thing, there are bills and they come due in the NFL. There's a lot of people lauding how the Eagles have managed to pay everyone. But at some point that collapses on itself. So fascinating offseason for the Eagles.
Lastly, a tidbit from earlier today that the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers are splitting from each other. Maybe the least surprising news of the offseason, considering how his tenure in New York went. You look at the possibilities of where the Jets could go. Obviously, the draft is one route. I know earlier in the season we talked about Sam Darnold, but maybe his stock has taken a hit with how he ended off in the season, and maybe there's not a reunion coming forth here with the team that drafted him in the first place. But what avenue do you think is best for this Jets team that is in transition right now?
Well, they're one of the most fascinating teams in the NFL going into this offseason, and it is because of that. Rodgers stepped into that role as a team that they looked that had a lot of really good pieces there. They thought they had a decent O-line. That's certainly regressed, but they've got one of the top young receivers in football in Garrett Wilson. They've got this defense, which has an amazing defensive line, some great pass rushers, good against the run, and some fabulous players in the secondary like Sauce Gardner. So the idea is you can plug a quarterback in there and you should still be a contender. And let's face it, this is an issue that is staring at the Jets because they do have some older players. They do have some big contracts. Can you afford to pay Wilson and Sauce when they were drafted in the same year? It's going to take some creative management to get some of these guys under contract. You have some older, bigger contracts. You brought in guys like Devontae Adams to appease Rodgers, and now you're stuck with them. So you want a quarterback who can go right now, and I'm not sure who that is. You mentioned Sam Darnold. Is it Kirk Cousins, who failed spectacularly in Atlanta? Maybe you figure that him a year removed from his Achilles injury, he will be better. The draft is one thing that this year, and certainly there's a lot of teams at the top of the draft. You look at Tennessee, you look at Cleveland, that desperately need a quarterback, and there's really only two that people are talking about, and I'm not sold on either of them. We get to go through this whole combine and scouting process coming up. But, you know, if Cam Ward had come out last year, people were talking about him being a 4th or a 5th round pick, and now he's in the conversation for the 1st round pick just because it's really only him and Shedeur Sanders. So, you know, do the Jets move up and make a play for one of them? Do they take a guy in the 2nd round and then you're kind of held to a couple of years of development? I'm not sure where the Jets go. You know, I'm not sure where Rodgers goes either. Maybe it's Pittsburgh. That's another team that appears to have an older defense that's ready to go now. Got some pieces on offense and a good running game. They just need a quarterback, as they've said they're moving on from Russell Wilson. So the NFL never stops, and the offseason to many of us is more exciting than the in-season.
Yeah, going from Russell Wilson to Aaron Rodgers would be quite something, but you can never count out a team like Pittsburgh. They always do some interesting things. We'll see how it all goes down.
And Aaron Rodgers and Mike Tomlin would be pretty damn entertaining too. So, and yeah, George Pickens, throw him in the mix.
Absolutely. Yeah, some really interesting storylines, and we'll be talking a lot about it over the next few months here during the off season. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For Paul Chapman, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.